And now it would be nice to have the actual number of shelves being displayed here, not just a slider where we cannot tell what number it is. And as well here we'd like to see the name of the material that's being selected. And then we'll have a button of the price that will match what the user is configuring. So first thing we can see here is as I was moving this, that did not edit the shelf anymore, and we can see that there is an error. And that's because at some point I renamed this object from Geo1 to shelf, and that changed the path of this slider, what the callback of this slider does. So if I go back here, you can see that this is always referring to the Geo1, and I want to make sure I change that to shelf. So if I reload now, this slider should work as it has at the beginning. And so now let's display the number of shelves as a number. So I'm going to create an element, span id equal shelves count, span, and let's start at 4. Let's initialize it at 4. But then when we change this, I want to set it up to this. So now as I update it, we're going to see this is updating. So now what I realize now is that this number is not matching what we are seeing here. When we have the minimum 2 here, we only have one shelf, assuming we do not count the top one. So there is an offset of 1 in what we are doing. So basically I need to remove 1 from here. And now if I test this, I actually need to add 1, not remove 1. So now we have a problem that the number seems to be much higher than what we have defined, and the problem here is that even targeted value is actually a string, so I need to parse it first to make sure it is an integer, and then we can add 1. If I test this again, now we are correct. And I'm just going to fix this first value, so we are actually at 3 when we load the scene, so I'm going to make sure that in my HTML file I put the value of 3 here. And now we should be good. And now let's display the name of the material. So I'm going to create another element, and I'm going to put this into a paragraph. It will be easier to isolate. Create one and the label for material name. And now how do we detect? So we've seen how to click on one of those spheres and change a node inside the scene, but how do we get that to affect the HTML here? How do we need another callback to detect when we click here and affect something here. So what we are going to do is, if you look at the API, so we can see the base node is inherits from base node. And if you look at base node, we have more methods. And the one we're going to be interested is on cook end, which registers a callback that will be run every time the node finishes cooking. So in that case, what we want to do is every time the switch node is recooked, because this value is going to be changed by us clicking on those spheres, then we want to set a callback so that we can look at the value that's been changed and use that to change the name of the material. So let's do that. So let's take the path, and in here we're going to take the node, and we're going to say on cook end, and we're going to have name for the callback, which is can it call it progress bar, and here is our callback. So what do we do here? We need to know the value of the parameter of the input name. So this one, so it's a parameter called input. So we can take again this node. I'm just going to put it in a variable, switch node, and the index of the material is going to be switch node p.input, and we get the value of the attribute here of the parameter. Now, once we have this value, we can actually simply print it on the console to make sure we are on the right track. So it cooks the first time at 2. I'm just going to clear everything, and cook at 3, cook at 0. It gets me 0, it gets me 1, and it gets me 2. So that we have what we need now to change this. So let's simply create, define the material name. So material names, and we have white, we have light or beige wood, and we have dark wood. Now material name is equal at material names with the index that we have here, and if we want to update it, get element by ID material name dot inner text equal material name. Let's see if that works. So we see that we have dark wood, beige wood, and white. Let's make sure, let's separate the actual label to the text visually by just simply adding some strong tags. Here and here. So it's going to be a bit easier to look at. So now the material updates. Now let's have the price, and so I can remove this console.log. So now let's, how are we going to define the price? It can be, for this tutorial, it can be completely arbitrary, so I'm just going to create a function, price, and let's say it returns 10 for now. We're going to define it a bit later as a function of the number of shelves and the material. So I'm going to create another paragraph here. Price. Price. And I'm going to set up a function, update price, document get element by ID price in text equals $. Price, and I want to update that whenever we change the material or when we change the number of shelves. So right now it's initialized at 10, but let's set up an actual function for it. So let's just for now put the number of shelves, which is going to be this value. So actually, let's make it a function. Function shelves count. We say return this value and plus 1. No, which is dot plus 1, which is good like that. And now let's reload this. And as we change, we have 4 shelves. So actually it needs to be -1, which is goes here. If I reload, so we have 30, 40 when we have that. and now let's change it depending on the material. So let's simply have, if I'm gonna duplicate this, price by material name, let's say we have 10, this gives us 20, and this gives us 40. And so our material name could be a function as well, or it could just be a variable. So let's call it like this. So now we can access it through this global. So if we just multiply it by that, let's add that like this. And now if we reload, as we switch the material, the price is updated as well. And now let's create a button. So another paragraph. That button will allow us to submit what the user has configured to the server, which we do not have a server, but this is going to be a way to simulate it by button. Going to add an event when we click on the button. And let's actually put that at the very bottom. So we want to send some data to the server. We're going to send the shelves count. So we have a function for that. Material name, which is this one, and the price. And now instead of submitting to a server, let's simply create a pop-up. So now as we select what we want, let's add some class to this to look a bit nicer. So as we increase the number of shelves, we select the light beige wood, and click buy, then we have the shelves count 6, material name beige wood, price 1200, which is what we can send to the server, and then you can process the order.